Today we continue our reading from letter to the Hebrews, and Hebrews is a particularly deep text that we find in the New Testament writings, and the church gives us different, in a sense, continuous readings, especially in ordinary time, to reflect on. So we'll be reflecting on the letter to the Hebrews throughout this whole week in the first reading. And sometimes it's interrupted by a feast, by some kind of special celebration or optional saints, but it's essentially continuous, and then we'll go on to another selection. And what we see in this reading is one of the more profound, maybe the most profound aspects of Christology, right? The study of Christ. And it's what is man that you are mindful of him, or the Son of Man that you care for him? You have made him a little lower than the angels. You crowned him with glory and honor. And we know that Jesus as God, as second person of the Trinity, has the highest possible dignity. He is God from all eternity. This is part of our creed. Yet in his humanity, as creature, or as with the nature of a creature, which is us, and I do want to remind us that when we say creature, we just mean something created by God. To be a creature is to be anything that isn't God. So in the nature of a creature, he has a lower dignity than the angels, actually. And so this idea of God lowering himself to become incarnate, to minister to us, his own creation. And every now and then I run into someone, and people, I attract these kind of people because of my Roman collar, of course. And I run into somebody who follows some alternative faith or non-Christian religion, and what they always seem to want to do is market their tradition to me for a while. And I was very recently at a wedding reception. It was a beautiful wedding. Anyway, this person comes up to me and he says, "I am a practicing Buddhist." And then he said he was from California, and I was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Okay." And then I was like, "Yeah, I get that." And then he said I was raised Catholic, and I was like, "Yep, you didn't have to tell me." Anyway, he explained to me a little bit about some of his beliefs, and I hadn't asked, but I appreciated that he wanted to talk with me. And I was thinking to myself, with this interaction, which was relatively brief and pleasant, and many interactions I've had at airports and other kind of situations like that the self-abnegation of Christ, the giving of himself, you don't really find that in other traditions and in world religions. I'm not aware of an Islam, of God emptying himself in that way. In some of the traditions of the East, of anything with Buddha doing something like that, he's a representative of God. Only in Christianity do we find God being so foolish as to love his creatures so much as to become the beloved. And how powerful is that, right? How powerful is that gift? And it is foolish in a way, right? But Paul says the foolishness of God is greater than the wisdom of man. And it's so powerful, and we have to keep going back to that. And indeed, for God to become his creature, and I'm going to even make this point, there is a metaphor there of sexual intimacy with that. God has become his creation, and so we have to honor the act. We have to honor those intimate acts, because realizing that they must be in the right place, the right context, because they are a reflection of God becoming his own creation. How beautiful is that? Yet staying God. He always remains God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And in our reading today from the Gospel of Mark, this is kind of, we see Jesus basically as an exorcist, right? So he heals a lot of people in the Gospels. He heals a huge number of people. And sometimes it's harder to tell whether, exactly what he's doing. Remember that in the ancient world, they attributed a lot of health disorders to the activity of spirits. This was how they viewed the world. In this scene, the man actually has a dialogue with Jesus, and he exhibits a lot of classical signs of demonic possession and exorcism, right? He convulses, he does all that, and Jesus seems to perform an exorcism here. And one of the differences is that the Pharisees and the scribes, or the leaders of the Jews, had prayers of exorcism. You may not have known that. They actually did do exorcisms, but they, of course, couldn't command as such. And Jesus doesn't go through a long prayer. He just says, I've had it with you, out. Okay? And this is a sign of his divinity, a sign that Jesus is God, which is kind of the point that the author is making in the letter to the Hebrews, is that we take Jesus Christ completely seriously. Yes, he makes huge claims on us. He asks us to, through the church, he asks us to give him ourselves, our lives in a sense, to follow his commandments. Yet he has not left us without reason to believe and hope and trust in his promises. And indeed, this is a new teaching, as it says, he is God. He is God, and we are accountable to him. And so I pray today, as we continue our Mass and our week, that the Lord will help us to surrender ourselves, and that God would continue to cast evil out of my life, out of your lives, and help us to be rejoicing, be disciples that rejoice in him, and continue to follow our path of discipleship.